Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. Yesterday in the overview video talking about this record which features Trina, I mentioned that if I could go back in time, I would take a little bit more time with the low end in order to get it to fill up a little bit more stereo space. And a lot of the times we're really advised that we should keep our subtones and our low tones more mono, but I find that this is kind of more in that internet advice category than it is in real life. Sometimes we want a very wide low end. That's what creates a very full sound or a very cinematic sound. And so I want to show a few techniques here that we can use in order to get a wider low end while still retaining mono compatibility, which is important. Okay, so I'm going to play a little bit of this down right here.
Trina, this booty gon' bounce. His asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past me, I be yo. Book smarter street, made fresh to order. How you like it? I come tight and sweet.
So right now, both the kick and the 808 are dead center. They're completely mono. What I want to do is kind of stretch them out so that it fills up a little bit more space. Now, one of the principles to this that I think is really important is contrast. I'm not going to say that it never works when you have a wide sub bass or wide 808 and a wide kick drum at the same time. Sometimes that can absolutely work and sound great, but most of the time, having a strong sense of contrast with the low end is actually going to create a bigger image. So kind of picking one that can be wide and one that's going to be more focused into the center is usually going to give you the best result. Maybe you get the punch from the kick, but you get the width and the size from the 808, or vice versa. You get the punch from the 808 and you get a little bit of width from the kick. So I'm going to show what I would do with maybe an 808 first. I'm going to solo this 808 up right here. So one really easy way to do this is using a network of delays, and I reviewed this plugin last week. This is a really good plugin for widening up an 808 using a network of delays. It's called Room Widener. It's not very expensive, so I just want to show this one because it's low-hanging fruit. It's very easy. And we do hear a little bit of spreading of the image, like a little bit of smearing of the transient, but one of the things that I want to point out here is that this 808 is very sustain heavy. It's really based more on the sustain of it. If we get the transient from the kick, there's that contrast I'm talking about where we get the punch from the kick, but we get the spread and the size from the 808. And actually, honestly, this is probably my preferred way to do it, having experimented now with a few different techniques. But I want to show you some other techniques because I think it's good to have all of these in the arsenal so that we can, situationally situationally dependent. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Each situation we have some different approaches and we can see which one works best. So I would say the most conventional approach is probably to use some kind of a Dimension D type of chorusing. A Dimension D is a chorus effect, but it's not a typical chorus effect. It's done in a way where you don't really hear a lot of pitch warble. You can if you really push it, but it uses this combination of delays and distuning and things like that to kind of create a very transparent sound, and depending on which style you choose, you can actually get it to be pretty subtle. So I'm going to have all of these sends in pre-fader mode. I recommend when doing these kinds of effects, you use a pre-fader send, because then you can kind of fine-tune the effect by itself, and then you can fine-tune the effect in the context of the original sound as well. So here's what this sounds like. And you can tell that is a super wide image. Now we get a whole bunch of controls over here. We have a focus control, we have our styles control, detune, delay. There isn't a single way to do this and set this up so that it works for every 808, but what I will say is this. If you pull in your dry 808, you pull in your micro shift, and then you monitor in mono. So you flip over to mono in your playback or whatever it is, and then you listen to it in a way where you're tuning everything so that it has the best mono fold. What you'll ultimately get is something that has a very wide image, but also folds into mono really well. And that's how I chose all of these settings. I went through the different style settings. I started at 12 o'clock, everything, and flat right here. I went through the different styles. Let's start on that second hit, actually. We can hear that third one gets a little phasey, like if you listen to the pitch of it. Kind of hear that wow kind of tone. So that's a little too much. I think style 2 was really the best. Style 1 kind of smears it a little bit. Style 2 seemed to be kind of the fattest sound. Very subtle difference between those two, but, you know, we're taking every win we can get. Then we're starting to play around with the delays and the distunes. So I like to go to the extremes. If I turn the detune all the way up to the max, what does that sound like? And there we get that kind of like flangey quality, phasey quality, so that's not so good. We don't get that when we tune this to the minimum, but I'm really interested in trying to get as much detune as possible because this detune is going to be part of the overall wideness when all is said and done. So I'm just going to turn this up as it's playing back, and when I hear a spot that I think sounds good, I'm just going to stop. So a little bit of detune I think works. Monofold still sounds pretty good. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the delays. When the delay is too loose, I hear a very distinct flamming effect. I don't think that I want that. So what I want to do is start basically going to, again, as loose as possible until I start hearing that distinct flamming effect. So this is kind of like on the border. I think that in the context of the overall mix here, it's going to sound fine. Once I've got this set up right, then I can move over to my focus knob. The focus knob is going to preserve some of the sub information. It's going to not allow it to go through the dimension deprocessing, which might clean up a little bit of any kind of comb filtering that might be happening. So I'm going to experiment with the focus, but my goal is to have the focus as low as possible. Meaning as much of the sub going through the actual chorus spread as I can get without losing too much punch. So it's a little stronger if I turn the focus up to, what does this end up being, like 70 hertz, 60 hertz? So if I take like the deepest part of the sub out of this chorusing, then it does kind of retain a little bit more punch in mono. And then my question is just how much of that punch do I really need, considering that there might be a kick drum? And here, because the kick drum doesn't always hit with it, I would say I'm going to err on the side of a little punchier. So now I'm going to spread it out a bit. And lastly, just lower it. So that's a good formula for approaching a Dimension D style chorusing. Now these ideas kind of translate over to any sort of chorusing where you just kind of tune it. This is just the air ensemble. It's basically a stock Pro Tools thing, I think for like a low upsell or something like that. But basically just making sure that the rate isn't too fast so we don't get any kind of weird pitch warbling, that we don't have too much depth in the actual movement of where the chorus delays are, so we don't get too much flanging effect, you know, just managing that stuff so that it ultimately sounds good. So here is the same idea, it's just I'm doing it with a stock plugin, basically, instead of with the Soundtoys Micro Shift. And at least in stereo, I actually think this sounds a little better. You know, there is a little bit more modulation, but I don't really notice it. I am also using a linear phase EQ to kind of roll off some deep subs. It's not as much as I was rolling off in the Microshift, but I'm also rolling off some of the buzzier overtones as well, so I'm keeping it a little cleaner. I am using a linear phase EQ. I think that that's pretty important whenever you're doing parallel stuff, particularly when it comes to like low end. You're going to end up with a more phase cohesive sound at the end of the day, and that's going to have a better monofold. Let's lower this down a little bit. That sounds pretty darn good. And then lastly, another way that we can do it is, and this is a very powerful technique, we start with our EQ. So here what I'm doing is I'm just trying to isolate the tone that I really want to hear in the actual spread. And in this case, I don't want there to be like a lot of buzz in the sides, so I'm rolling off quite a bit of the mids and top end. And then I don't necessarily want to have tons of subs in the side either. I kind of want just this like primary range between about maybe, I don't know, maybe about 70 hertz and about like, I don't know, 200, 300, somewhere in there. So just where the cleaner part of the 808 is kind of living. And then I'm using an imager. In this particular case, I'm using the isotope imager, which allows me to do a combination of, it's doing some other stuff under the hood, but the main function here is what's called a Haas delay, a 13.7 millisecond delay between the left and right side, which ends up spreading all that stuff. So basically, I'm taking this band of frequency energy, and I'm splitting it by doing a time delay, and the right is coming in a little bit later than the left. And that's going to produce a less kind of like phasey flangy result. Doesn't always work as well, but what's nice about this effect is that I can really target what I'm trying to do. So like if you have an 808 and you want to put your own kind of distortion on there, you can actually use something like a low pass filter, and you can cut all of the overtones out. And then you can put your own kind of distortion on there, whatever it might be. Let's say we want to use like, even just like the stock lo-fi, something like that. All right, that's super bassy. But actually that's kind of a cool sound. And if I turn this down a little bit, mix it with the original 808, you know, it's a little more subtle this way, but it's definitely kind of a cool effect. Let's go back to where we had it before. Let's get rid of this. You know, you could do a more aggressive distortion too, so that it's more obvious. But this is definitely like the cleanest version of all these techniques. And because this is kind of a grungy 808, it might end up kind of being the best one. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. But then what we do is we go into our mix and we check out how all of them sound, right? So let's see how this sounds with, say, the microshift.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smarter street.
I think we can push it a little more.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO.
Let's try with a more regular chorus plugin.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smarter street.
And let's try it with our imager.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smarter street. Made fresh to order, how you like it.
And they all kind of work. If I want the biggest sound, I think the biggest sound is probably the imager in this particular case. I feel like I can just get more of it in there. But I kind of like what the microshift is doing too.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home.
It's a little more tonal, like I hear a little bit of that wow kind of a sound happening. It's subtle, but it's there. But actually, it kind of works for the record, so I'm not necessarily mad at it. And then lastly, you know, maybe we don't want the 808 to be wide. We can do all of this with the kick drum and see how that feels.
Bounce, his asleep. A TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smart. smarter street, made fresh to order, how you like it.
I kind of like it. I think I could even push it a little bit more and kind of make it like a very deliberate effect rather than like trying to be subtle and doing it for mix purposes. I could actually kind of make it part of the sound.
Bounce, his asleep, a TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smarter street.
I mean, it's going to ruin the mono fold. So I do have to be careful about that. Like, I can pretty much tell that's not going to sound good in mono. But, I mean, you know, maybe I just say, okay, whatever. So maybe it doesn't sound that good in mono. Whatever. That might be okay. Let's try it with the ensemble.
Bounce, his asleep, a TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a
Ooh, that kind of sounds cool, right? Has this, like, very boofy quality to it. Maybe a little bit less of that.
Bounce, his asleep, a TKO in the streets, I'm classy, but at home I'm a freak. Don't put nothing past my BO, book smarter street.
That'd be the one. That would be the one that I would want to go with for this mix, I think. A little bit of tweaking from there, but, you know, finding that sweet spot with the level and everything. But I think that that's doing what I wanted to do. That's pretty cool. Okay, I want to wrap up here now that I've shown you these techniques. So if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. I released Mixing with Reverb earlier this month. It has a launch sale. If you use the code REVERB20, you get 20% off Mixing with Reverb, which is the most comprehensive tutorial on reverb, anything you would ever want to know on the net, in the world, in all time. Hooray! That link will be in the description below, so please check that out. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.